On that cold New York morning, the noise of cars mingled with the sound of hurried footsteps on the wet sidewalks. But among the thousands of drivers crisscrossing the city, there was a different man. Sitting behind the wheel of a regular taxi, wearing a worn cap and sunglasses, he carried a secret no one could imagine. His name was Ethan, and despite his simple clothes and his hands scarred by the cold, this man owned one of the most profitable technology companies in the country. A millionaire disguised as a taxi driver. But what would make a man with so much money and so much power choose to hide behind a steering wheel? You'll find out the answer today, and you may never look at the word trust the same way again. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because what happened during that race will make you question what really matters in a relationship. Ethan Prescott had everything many dream of achieving. A luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, sport cars, private jet travel, and a company valued at millions of dollars. But behind that empire of glass and success, there was a man who felt invisible. Each morning, he woke up in expensive sheets, but he felt the weight of a loneliness that money couldn't buy back. His wife, Clara, was elegant, sweet, and seemingly happy. However, something about her had changed. The sparkle in her eyes, which once lit up at the sight of him, was now just a reflection of her cell phone screens. Their conversations had become automatic dialogues, as if love had become routine. Ethan began to notice details that disturbed him. Silent dinners, laughter that no longer echoed, and a nagging feeling that, even sleeping next to the woman he loved, he was alone. He wondered, does she still love me? Or does she only love what I represent? It was curious to think that the more achievements he accumulated, the more distant he felt from real life. That in meetings, surrounded by investors and applause, his mind wandered to the emptiness that awaited him at home. Ethan's loneliness wasn't a lack of companionship. It was a lack of connection. And at that point, the viewer realizes, perhaps he wasn't the most powerful man in the building, but rather the most lost within it. But what no one knew was that this anguish was about to turn into a decision that would change everything. He began to observe Clara in silence, trying to understand her gestures, her looks, her absences. And that's when a crazy idea started to take shape. An idea that many would call desperation, others genius. Ethan wanted to know the truth, but not through the eyes of the millionaire she knew. He wanted to hear Clara's soul. Without her knowing who was listening, that I wanted to know what she said when she thought no one was listening. And so, he decided to disguise himself, not out of revenge, but out of curiosity, out of pain, maybe out of love. But before I tell you about the plan he created, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Because what comes next will make you wonder, how far will someone go to find out if they are still loved? For entire nights, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Clara slept beside him. She seemed peaceful, but he saw an abyss in that silence. A chasm that grew between them, fueled by unspoken words and hidden smiles. It was there, amidst insomnia and loneliness, that the idea that would change the course of their story was born. Ethan didn't want any more assumptions. He wanted the truth. And to find her, he would need to leave his own world, trade the suit for the disguise. That's how he secretly bought a used yellow car with scratches on the doors and the smell of old gasoline. He began frequenting neighborhoods he'd never visited before, observing ride-hailing drivers, noting their gestures, accents, and expressions. He didn't want to be recognized. He wanted to be invisible. Within days, the elegant Wall Street millionaire was gone. In his place emerged a simple man with cheap clothes and a husky voice. An anonymous cabbie on the cold streets of New York. In the early days, the feeling was almost liberating. No one called him Mr. Prescott. No one recognized him at events. No one treated him with reverence. IT was just another face in traffic, one among many. But as he drove along the illuminated avenues and listened to the passengers' stories, something curious began to happen. Ethan began to see life through different eyes. He saw couples fighting over lack of time, mothers rushing between two jobs, young people dreaming of what he already had and no longer knew how to value. And it was then that a question began to hammer in his mind. Could the problem be with her or with me? The irony was cruel. The man who could buy anything now sought something money couldn't buy: honesty. And the more he drove, the more he realized that maybe it wasn't Clara who had changed, but Ethan himself, imprisoned by pride and emotional distance. He swore he wouldn't confront her, not right away. He wanted to listen, observe, understand, but fate, capricious as always, had other plans. On a cold morning, when the sun was still trying to break through the fog, the app beeped on Ethan's makeshift cell phone that a new passenger, or rather, a female passenger, name. Clara Prescott. His heart raced. The hands trembled. Time seemed to stop. And there, in that instant, he knew the game had changed. The disguise that was just a plan to observe from afar was about to become a brutal mirror of the truth itself. And you? What would you do if the love of your life got into the back seat without knowing who you really are? Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. Would you have the courage to do the same as Ethan did? The cold that morning was sharp as a blade. Ethan parked the taxi on the corner of Fifth Avenue, trying to control his breathing. The name flashing on the app still felt like a hallucination. Clara Prescott. He glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping it was a coincidence. But when he saw the familiar silhouette walking toward him, the world stopped for a moment. It was her. The same hair tied in a hasty bun. The same beige coat he'd given her for her last birthday. Only now, she was walking alone. His heart was pounding so loudly it echoed inside the car. For a second, Ethan considered canceling the ride. He considered leaving, running away, leaving everything as it was. But it was too late. Clara opened the door, got in, and, without even looking at the driver, said in her usual soft voice, "Good morning. Can you take me to Brooklyn?" That voice, which he knew better than any song, sounded different. There was a hidden weariness, a sad lightness. Ethan replied with a simple, "Sure, don't worry." The taxi began to move, and the silence inside seemed to scream. He watched her face in the mirror, trying to understand what was happening behind those distracted eyes. And with each stoplight, a memory returned. The day they met, their first kiss, the easy laughter that now seemed lost somewhere in time. "You look tired," he ventured, disguising his voice. Clara let out a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I guess I'm just tired of everything." That sentence hung in the air like an unplanned confession. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Tired of everything? His too? The race continued amid heavy traffic, but time seemed to stand still. She began to speak as if she had found, in this strange driver, a neutral ear, someone who would not judge her. She said she felt lonely, even though she lived in a big house. That her husband worked too much, and she no longer knew what made him happy. He said that sometimes he wondered if love could die silently, without screams, without betrayal, just growing cold. Ethan listened, motionless. Each word was a blow. He realized he had never really listened to her, that she had been talking for a long time, and he had only responded. Now, in disguise, he finally listened to the woman he loved. The traffic light turned green, but his heart stopped. It was as if each sentence of hers ripped away a piece of the character he had created to survive. The millionaire disappeared. Only the man remained, vulnerable, remorseful, human. And then, suddenly, Clara looked in the rearview mirror and said, "You know, sometimes I think people change too much when they become successful. They forget who they were." Ethan looked away, swallowing hard. She was talking about him, and she had no idea. When the car stopped at its destination, Clara thanked him and smiled slightly. The same smile he loved, but now directed at a stranger. She got out, closed the door, and walked away. Ethan stood there, staring in the mirror until she disappeared into the crowd. The silence inside the taxi seemed to hurt more than any scream. He had gotten what he wanted, to hear the truth, but the price was. Realizing that maybe it was too late to change what I had let die. If this story is already moving you, leave your like now, subscribe to the channel, and comment. Would you have the courage to listen to what someone else thinks of you, without knowing that it is you who is listening? That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of Clara in the back seat, with her distant gaze and weary voice, replayed in his mind like an endless movie. He had braced himself for anything, a lie, a betrayal, even a secret. But he wasn't ready to hear the silent pain of someone who just wanted to be noticed. In the following days, Ethan returned to driving the taxi. Not out of necessity, but because something in him had changed. He wanted to understand her more, to listen without interruptions, without judgment. And fate, once again, seemed to be playing with him. Out on a gray afternoon, the app rang again. The name was familiar, Clara Prescott. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he took a deep breath and accepted the ride. Clara got into the car with the same delicacy as before, but with an even more melancholic look. "Ah, it's you again," he said with a slight smile. "You drive well, and you hear even better." Ethan just nodded, hiding his voice behind a disguise. The car drove off, and soon the outburst began. But this time it was different. Clara didn't just talk about tiredness. She talked about absence, how invisible she felt next to her husband, how conversations had turned into reports, dinners into meetings, hugs into protocols. Ethan heard every word like blades piercing his chest. "Sometimes," she said, her voice breaking, "I think he doesn't even see me anymore. I talk," he responds, "but it's like he's not there. His money buys everything, except time with me." Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to hold back the tears. She didn't hate him. She just missed him, and that hurt more than any betrayal. "And you know what's saddest?" Clara continued. "He thinks I'm cold, that I don't care. But I've only learned to keep quiet, because when you talk and no one listens, eventually you stop trying." The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan felt the weight of every mistake, every absence disguised as commitment. He realized that love doesn't die suddenly. It dies slowly, suffocated by wrong priorities. As the car drove over the Brooklyn Bridge, the sunset painted the sky with golden hues, as if wanting to give that conversation one last breath of beauty. Clara looked at the horizon and said, "You know, sometimes I just wish he would listen to me, without correcting me, without trying to fix it. Just listen." Ethan looked away from the mirror. Tears flowed silently. For the first time in a long time, he was listening, really. When the race was over, Clara thanked him again, left the payment in cash, and got out of the car. But before closing the door, she looked at him and said with a sad smile, "You reminded me of who I was. Thank you for that." The door closed, and with it, something inside Ethan broke too. He stood there, unable to start the in that simple confession, without shouting, without guilt. He had discovered the truth that money cannot buy. Love is not about controlling. It's about listening. What about you? Have you ever thought about how many times someone by your side just wanted to be heard? If this part touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will make you rethink what true love means. That night, Ethan parked his taxi in front of the building and stood there, watching the city lights reflect off the yellowed hood. The distant honking of horns and the cold wind seemed to whisper the question he'd been avoiding. What now? He had heard everything he needed and nothing he wanted. Clara wasn't betraying him, wasn't deceiving him. She had simply given up trying to be heard. And suddenly, the millionaire who had always controlled everything realized he had lost the essential. The dialogue, the touch, the look. But how can we ask for forgiveness for a silence that lasted years? Ethan went upstairs to the apartment, where the luxury now felt heavy. The marble gleamed too brightly, the white walls echoing her absence. He walked through the empty rooms and felt like an intruder in his own home. The suit he wore every day hung on the chair, like a reminder of who he pretended to be. The disguise wasn't the taxi, he thought. It was this life. As the clock ticked away, Ethan stared into the mirror. The man reflected there was no longer the same man who had built empires, closed deals, or addressed crowds. He was simply someone lost, trying to rediscover the love he had let slip away. He wondered, what if I tell her the truth? What if she finds out it was me driving? Will she understand? Or will she hate me? Doubt tore him apart. If he spoke, he could destroy what trust remained. If I kept quiet, I would live with the weight of the lie and the regret. His mind became a battleground between pride and guilt on one side, the man used to controlling everything. On the other, the husband who just wanted to be forgiven. Comparisons haunted him. An empire can be rebuilt, but a broken heart may not. Amidst that internal chaos, he remembered her words. I just wanted him to listen to me. And it was as if the universe suddenly went silent. Ethan understood that before confessing anything, he needed to learn to listen. Without masks, without excuses, without hiding behind success. In the following days, the disguise became a prison. Every time he drove, he felt the weight of truth growing inside him. The taxi, once a symbol of freedom, was now a reminder of everything it had ceased to be. He began to avoid the app, but regret followed him wherever he went. In meetings, in interviews, in Clara's eyes, which seemed increasingly distant. It was ironic. The man who had everything was trapped in a choice that left him unable to breathe. Until one night, he looked in the mirror and realized he couldn't put it off any longer. The fear of losing her was no longer greater than the need to be honest. And there, with a heavy heart, Ethan decided it was time to end the charade. I needed to look her in the eyes, and for the first time, speak without disguise. But what he didn't imagine is that confession wouldn't just bring tears. Bringing the truth to light would also mean confronting his past, his pride, and everything that had kept him from Clara. What about you? Would you tell the truth, knowing she might hate you? Or would you keep the secret forever? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because in the next chapter, you'll see how a single truth can rebuild or destroy a love. That Monday morning's dawn seemed different. The sun, which always rose imposingly over the city's buildings, seemed to hesitate behind the clouds, as if it, too, knew something was about to change. Ethan woke early, but couldn't get up right away. He spent long minutes sitting on the edge of his bed, hands clasped together, staring at the floor, like someone preparing for a trial without knowing what the sentence will be. In the room, the silence was almost absolute. The only thing that could be heard was the ticking of the clock, the same sound that had accompanied him throughout the night. Every second seemed to scream inside him. It's today. Clara was in the kitchen, making coffee, oblivious to the hurricane brewing nearby. The smell of warm bread mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee brought back memories of a time when they still sat together, laughing at each other's silly antics and making plans. But now, it all seemed too far away. Ethan approached slowly. His heart was pounding, as if trying to stop him from continuing. Clara, he called, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. She turned around, surprised. Did something happen? He took a deep breath. It was time to open the chest that held the truth. I need to tell you something. Something that might change everything between us. Clara frowned in confusion. She put her cup down on the table and crossed her arms. What are you talking about, Ethan? The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to compress the air. He felt sweat dripping down his palms. That taxi driver who took you a few weeks ago, he began, his voice trembling, was me. The world stopped. For a few seconds, Clara just stared at him, unblinking. The sound of the kettle boiling became distant, as if everything around it had disappeared. What? She whispered incredulously. You're saying that was you? He nodded, embarrassed. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to hear from you what I didn't have the courage to ask. I wanted to know if there was still something between us. Clara took a step back, as if she had been hit by an invisible blow. Her eyes filled with tears, not just of sadness, but of deep disappointment. So you tricked me, he said, his voice breaking. Pretended to be someone else to spy on me. Ethan tried to explain, but his words stumbled with guilt. It wasn't espionage. I swear, it was desperation. I wanted to understand you, Clara. I lost control of everything. She interrupted him. And you thought disguising yourself as a taxi driver would be the solution? That listening to my pain in secret would make you a hero. Those words were like blades that he lowered his head, defenseless. I deserve your anger. But everything I heard that day made me realize how much I hurt you. I left you alone, even though I was by your side. I needed a change. Clara watched him, her gaze divided between love and hurt. You could have talked to me, Ethan. I would have listened to you. But you chose to disguise yourself. You chose to deceive me again. He came closer, his eyes watering. I know. And that's why I'm here now, to ask for forgiveness. Not as the millionaire who buys everything, but as the man who lost what he loves most. The silence returned. But now, it was a different kind of silence. There were no more screams, just the pent-up breath of two hearts trying to recognize each other. Clara turned her back, wiped her tears, and stood in front of the window. Outside, the city was still alive. Horns, footsteps, sirens, all so far removed from the storm raging inside. She finally said, her voice weak, I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan. But for the first time, I believe you're being sincere. He didn't answer. He just let a tear fall, feeling the weight and relief of someone who had finally shed all his masks. And at that moment, without them noticing, the sun broke through the clouds and illuminated the apartment. IT wasn't the end. It was an uncertain but true new beginning. Because deep down, love doesn't die when there is confession. He just hopes that someone has the courage to take off the disguise. Time passed. Not much, just enough for the wounds to begin to heal, still aching. Ethan returned to his routine, but something inside him had changed forever. The man who once calculated profits and contracts now spent his mornings walking, watching ordinary people take taxis, subways, and buses. To IT was as if he wanted to relearn how to be human. Clara had changed too. She didn't forgive him right away, and perhaps she never had to. But one day, during a long, silent conversation on the same park bench where they used to meet, she said something Ethan would never forget. You only realized who I was when you stopped being who you pretended to be. Those words became a mirror that reflected not only his mistake, but that of many others. How often do we disguise ourselves? How often do we hide behind masks of success, pride, or coldness, just to avoid facing our own flaws? Ethan had disguised himself as a taxi driver, yes. But deep down, that disguise was a reflection of the man he'd been hiding from himself for years. The millionaire who could buy the world but couldn't buy a sincere look. The husband who gave expensive gifts but paid no attention. The man who had built empires but let his own home crumble. And maybe that's what this story teaches us. That love is not a transaction, that IT is not measured by possessions, status, or comfort. Love lives in the details, in listening, in the embrace, in the asking for. Forgiveness point one day, Ethan started driving again. Not because I needed it, but because there was something therapeutic about getting back behind the wheel. He turned on the radio, looked in the rearview mirror, and smiled discreetly, remembering the woman who made him take off the greatest disguise of all, that of indifference. And as for Clara, well, they say she still takes taxis from time to time, even though she doesn't need to. Perhaps in search of the feeling of being in motion, of not stopping, of continuing to believe that people change, even when the past insists on reminding them otherwise. What they live today, no one knows for sure. But there are those who say that in some discreet cafe in Manhattan, 2 cups of cappuccino meet every Saturday at 10 in the morning. And that between shy laughter and sincere looks, the silence is now light. In the end, Ethan discovered something that no amount of money could buy. That the truth may hurt, but disguise kills little by little. And sometimes you have to lose everything, including your own image, to finally find love again. So, if this story made you think, if it touched your heart in any way, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and write here in the comments. Would you forgive someone who deceived you, even if it was out of love? Your opinion could inspire the next video. And remember, not every disguise is to deceive. Sometimes it's just a desperate attempt to be seen again.